Mario, on page 74. Keep going. Yeah, keep going with Heraclitus. So once again, several of these, right? Like you have to kind of look at many of them because, as far as immortality, right? Number 59, and Hades' soul is perceived by smelling. You might think, okay, well, he's agreeing with what Homer said in the Odyssey, right? He's agreeing with the myths. But if you look at the other ones where he talks about that, it's sufficiently clear that he doesn't agree. He's a materialist, right? Also, the simple fact is, we know so Aristotle in his De Anima, book 1, Aristotle talks about, he says, for Heraclitus, the soul is made out of fire, right? So, right there, there's no reason to think it would be immortal. So in that light, right, Hades' soul is perceived by smelling. Remember, too, the order of them is according to Wheelwright. So Wheelwright is putting them in this order, but they don't occur in this order. They're just fragments. So the way you group them can kind of, Wheelwright actually thinks, so there are people who think that he did think the soul is immortal, but then others who don't. But the question is, right, so you can group them in a way. So if number 59, Hades' soul is perceived by smelling, I would have grouped that at the beginning with, right, eyes are more accurate witnesses than ears, right? Eyes and ears are bad witnesses of men having barbarian souls. So, meaning that, right, he's talking about even in the myths, sensation is important. But also the one corpse more fit is than dung. I think Tyler, you were saying right about he could still be saying, well, the soul is immortal. It's just the body, so it doesn't matter. But in terms of the myths, what would happen if your corpse is just thrown out? Does anyone know? In terms of Greek myths, anyone remember?
If your soul wouldn't rest.
Exactly. So your soul. So you have to realize that's a very extremely radical thing to say, because in terms of the myths, what would happen to your soul then? Would it go to Hades? No. It would just forever be a ghost wandering the earth. That's a big thing in the. That's why at the end of the Iliad, Priam, who is Hector's father, goes and begs to bury Hector's body, because otherwise his soul can never be at rest. His soul won't go to Hades, right? So for him, according to what he says, souls would never go to Hades in the first place, because he thinks you should throw them out, right? And I mentioned how that's, in every culture, atheism is really, you guys may or may not be aware of this, but atheism doesn't really exist in primitive cultures or primitive societies. That doesn't actually exist. It's a result of atheistic ideologies, right? Like Karl Marx or Nietzsche or Freud, all these atheistic ideologies. But they're not, I'm not saying they're monotheists, but they all have some kind of idea of some kind of afterlife and spirits and so on. I was mentioning, it was actually, his name was Vico, the predecessor to anthropology, Giambattista Vico, he was Italian. And he made that point. He said every primitive society has some kind of marriage right and some kind of burial right. Even if it just means, even if you don't actually put them in the ground, there's some kind of consigning the body. I don't know, you consign it to the ocean or whatever. But there's some kind of right to acknowledge the fact that the soul has moved on. So when he says, of course, if it to be thrown out, that's flying in the face of all that. On a similar note, number 67. Mary?
There away men after their such things as they neither respect nor have any conception of.
Okay, so what could that mean? In terms of the myths, what would that mean, right?
That man doesn't know about the afterlife, right?
Right, it would mean, well, we don't know what it's like to be in Hades because we haven't been there. But what's the other possible meaning? Especially considering that he can use irony.
Could that just be like, since there's nothing
Exactly.
after death,
Right.
we can't conceive nothing?
Exactly, so it's purposely ambiguous. But given that this is Heraclitus the pessimist we're talking about, another one, right, on his pessimism, because let's look at number 97 for a second. James, page 77, number 97.
After death, men have the wish to live and to accept their dooms. Then they leave behind them children to become dooms in their kin.
Right, so does this seem to imply like life is going to end if you're good, right? Is he saying that if you're good, you're going to go to the Elysian Fields and be reunited with your family, like in that movie Gladiator, right? That's like the happy hunting grounds of some American Indians, right? You're doomed, like. Let's see. So more on just kind of his criticism of religion. Number 74. Yeah, go ahead.
So then does he view like childbirth and like extending your family as evil because you're in a sense
So this is the first occurrence of kind of antinatalism. Like, I think Dr. Jacobs will tell you, someone wrote, I think he's from Australia, about 10 years ago, he wrote a book called Better to Have Never Been Born. It's a horrible idea. It's extreme pessimism. But that's the argument the person is making. That's a horrible argument, but they're saying, well, by being alive, you experience suffering, so it'd be better not to exist. If a person commits suicide, I won't be surprised because it would be consistent with what he wrote in his book. But right, this is what you call antinatalism. That it doesn't seem to make much sense for him. Now, it's certainly pessimism, and it would be very drastic. It would be very disastrous if people actually took that seriously. And a kind of nihilism, right? Like primacy of nothingness. Number 74.
When visitors unexpectedly found Heraclitus warming himself by the cooking fire, here too are the gods.
Right, or another translation would be, here too the gods are present. So anybody? Oh, by the way, another version of it, it was just by the fire. It doesn't say, so some people take it as he was working with fire, like making something with the fire. Anybody?
He's got the symbol for the flux, right? Isn't that it?
True.
Saying? So
But why is saying here too the gods are present at his fire where he's working?
He's kind of naturalizing the gods, I think.
Okay, and how is he doing that?
It's kind of saying everything that we come from, or something that we pull value from the fire is
good, yeah.
providing for us.
Like here, who's there really?
Yeah, nobody. I mean,
Him
and the
at
fire,
work.
right?
So like the divine is with us, kind of. Because normally, right, the temple, there's a special presence of the goddess Athena if you go out to the temple. That's why you're not allowed to commit crimes in the temple. That's why people flee to the temple, they flee to the altar. And right, then the gods are very harsh against the Greeks because they killed people at the altar, right? They didn't respect that. That's part of why all these horrible things happen after they leave Troy. And he's saying, well, here too the gods are present, right? Just him, there's certainly fire, right? Fire is, remember how Thales said the water is somehow divine, right? That pervades everything.
Yeah, fire.
So the fire is somehow divine, but not in a personal way. It's just what is eternal, right? So also makes you think maybe of Prometheus. Remember how Prometheus stole fire from the gods? So Brother James, number 75. The more you read them, the more you get a picture you get.
They cling to images, much as if they were to talk to houses, but they do not know what gods and heroes are.
Anybody?
To referring this against how the gods of their stories and heroes were most likely just people, bold.
Right. And what would, for him, right, mortals become immortals. How do mortals become immortals?
By those stories.
Battle, right? By stories, if you're talking about the myths, or by battle, like winning. Remember, war is the father of all. Some he makes immortal gods by victory. Like we all talk about, everyone knows who Alexander the Great was. Everyone knows who Napoleon was. Was Napoleon a good person? Not really, but we all know who he was, right? He's become immortal. He's gone down in history, right? Next.
Night walkers, magicians, chance revelers, and participants in the mystery. What are regarded as mysteries among men are unholy rituals.
Want to keep reading?
77. Their procession and their public hymns.
So phallic hymns. So phallic is basically representing the male genitalia.
Yes. Their procession and their phallic hymns, would be disgraceful exhibitions were it not that they were done in honor of Dionysus.
So that's important. It shows you they have a sense of the natural law. A lot of the Greeks, they basically thought it was disgraceful, right? He's saying it's disgraceful to have these. So in the Dionysius temples, phalluses would feature prominently, right? Because it's a kind of it's not teaching moderation and chastity. Okay, if you're following Dionysius, the Bacchantes would have, like, the word orgy comes from the Bacchantes. Bacchantes. Dionysius, another name is Bacchus, right? In Latin, Dionysius Bacchus is another name, or Bacchus. So they would go and get drunk and revel and act crazy in every imaginable way, right? And they're carrying a gigantic phallus in a procession, right? And after the procession, they're not going to go say the rosary, for a nice restaurant, It's so see it's a pity. I went to Greece, and unfortunately they choose to showcase on the postcards a lot of the pornography was not invented in the 1960s. It wasn't invented with, what is it, Hugh Hefner? There's pornography. A lot of it is same-sex pornography and stuff. So that's the thing. Like, Christianity kind of swept all that away, but when you dig stuff up from the earth, this is kind of what you find, right? You find that maybe the Christians smashed it before it got buried, but that's what you piece it back together. That's an aspect of it. So now, not everyone was a follower of Dionysius, right? But what I think here you do see, I mean, we don't agree with his materialism, but he still has a sense of the natural law. He still has a sense of ethics, and saying, like, this kind of dissolute life is not a way to live, right? And that continued with Socrates. So one of the things that tied into Socrates, now Socrates about 200 years later, but 150 years later, but Socrates being executed was, you had mentioned, Christian, about the Hermes, right? So the Hermes, which are milestones and boundary markers, would have a phallus on them as well. A lot of them are broken off. Now, you could think the Christians did that, but certainly they would have eventually, maybe once it became a legal religion. But at one point basically when Socrates is about 50, one morning they woke up and some group of people had smashed the phalluses off a bunch of the Hermes. So for them, there was kind of an uproar, because, like it or not, that's, even if people weren't worshippers of Dionysius, that was just how it was. And people who work on, once again, the sociologists will go into this, like the whole, it goes, the first like statuettes that we know of, right? It doesn't match up with the timeline of Genesis, right? Whenever Adam and Eve was, that must have been tens of thousands of years ago, right? It doesn't match up with that short timeline. Some scientists would say it's 1 million years ago. I don't know, the first humans, but the first statuettes are fertility idols, like little goddess figurines that just somehow represent female fertility, and so, right, female genitalia, male genitalia, like some sense of power associated with that, like power because it's associated with life, right? And in a primitive situation, they're afraid of death, right? There's the world is kind of a scary place, right? They didn't have medicine like we do now and all that. So that's kind of the roots of that, the fertility figures, right? That's the earliest, even long before the Greek Mississippi, from like 10,000 BC, before any cities existed, or before really, right, even maybe agriculture. So there's a kind of reason for that. It's actually kind of supposed to be life affirming, but then right, with the worship of Dionysius was exceedingly decadent. And if you go to Athens, unfortunately, be prepared, because the postcards, I guess, if you go to the French Quarter too, some of the postcards, like, you got to watch where you put your eyes, because it's, we don't want to have an occasion of sin if you have a lively imagination. But so that was the negative side. So we're not idealizing the Greek society, right? There was a lot of, but what's interesting is that there were people who were kind of disagreed with that. Here we see Heraclitus and later Socrates. And so because Socrates had been teaching that, that we shouldn't take them as literally, they're not anthropomorphic, we should practice virtues like moderation and so on, no one ever figured out really who did it, but it seems that it was him and his friends who were somehow involved. I don't think he was 50 years old. He didn't do it, but basically, actually, no. I correct myself. Alcibiades was implicated because one of his servants, one of the slaves, basically ratted him out, if you will. And Alcibiades was friends with Socrates. So even though Socrates wasn't directly guilty, it was his friends who had done it. And so that was one of the, it besmeared his reputation. One of the things that eventually, eventually led up to the execution, 20 years later. But from our perspective, it does show natural law. Like there is goodness, right? We're not Calvinists. It's not total corruption. There is goodness in human nature. And okay, so the next line is also very profound, I think. Go ahead.
Dionysus, in whose honor they rave and hold revels, is the same as Hades.
Okay, now this is why this has been preserved for 2,600 years. Like that's a very profound. Like notice it's a paradox. Because that doesn't make any sense. Dionysus is the god of partying and having fun, and I don't know. Like where he goes, like what is it? Grapevines spring up, so you can like have grapes and make wine, and right. And yet he's saying Dionysus is the same as Hades, right? Who's the god of death. So anybody want to comment on that?
They're not real to him. He's just
Certainly,
saying they're not
but
real.
why does he choose that paradox? Why does he take Dionysus and say, in fact, he's the same as Hades? In fact, yeah.
Because acting in that way seems the very death of the soul.
Okay.
In a way.
Well, that's what Socrates would say.
Right.
So Socrates will say that in his Apology. He'll say that by committing evil, I actually harm my soul and make my soul sick. He did say drunkenness makes you moist, but remember, his soul isn't really, he's a materialist. The soul is not immortal, at least if we take Aristotle, right, at his word in De Anima, book 1. But why does he, Dionysus, in his honors, they're raving and holding revels and partying is the same as Hades, the god of death. Anybody?
Yeah, I was speculating, like Dionysus is also said to be the god of madness and insanity type of thing. And I'm imagining Heraclitus like respecting reason and clear thought, and if you are mad and insane, then you're like a barbarian, you're a type of dead animal, like you're a dead person.
Okay, yeah, I mean, whatever we see when awake is death, when asleep dreams, number 16, right? If you're just living to party and have fun, it's actually not really life. Even though he is a pessimist, it doesn't mean he just thinks you should live however you want. The solution to his pessimism is not that you should go and party all the time. The solution to his pessimism is say, well, look, we accept that there's no afterlife, but we make the best of what we have. Kind of like when they said to Thales, why didn't you kill yourself? Well, why should I rush? Like, I mean, I'm learning about things and I'm making the best of it, right? Anybody else? Yeah.
I feel like he's saying Dionysus is no more real than Hades.
True. That's the first step. But so remember we talked about archetypes. I mean, how about that? Saying that the archetype, how is the archetype of Hades, who's like represents death, and why is saying that's the same? I mean, right. I think you guys are familiar with this idea, right? That living that way, just kind of living, fornicating, getting drunk, staying because they stay up until 5 o'clock, right? Stuff, living like a libertine. It actually is gonna. It's a form of death. It's actually not a form of life. It's not life-giving, you could say. And actually this is, if you study addiction, the whole psychology of addiction talks about this, that they'll say an addiction is really kind of self-destructive. It causes the person to self-destruct over time, to where if you're drinking and then you become addicted, then eventually it's going to destroy you. So I think that's why he's taking the two opposite archetypes.
Yeah, just like you just said. I think that's the argument here. Dionysus is like the party guy, whereas I'm assuming in their culture, Hades is kind of like hell. We don't like to talk about it.
Right.
So by
It's the
equating them
opposite.
together, he's just like, no, the party guy and the hell guy, they're the same.
Exactly. Yeah. Anybody else? Is that,
I don't know if you remember the Summer Olympics, how the Last Supper was portrayed with Dionysus
I
didn't
heard
see
about
how-
it. I didn't see
Yeah,
it.
it was like they portrayed.
I heard that it was disrespectful.
So
Yeah.
now I know how bad it
It
is.
had Dionysus in it.
Yes, they
Yeah.
said that was a Dionysus
They were-
portrayal versus like the Last Supper.
It was-
So they had. So now I see how they were.
Yeah,
how bad it is.
like I said, when I went to Athens, boy, those postcards,
They-
man, oof, oh my gosh, that's a pagan culture. You know, we that's been gone for what is it since 313? I mean, 313 they made Christianity legal. I mean, pagan temples weren't shut down until I think like 550, 580. So it's been about 1,500 years that the pagan temples were shut. You know, up until then, you could still go to the Temple of Dionysus with the gigantic phallus made out of marble, right? And then we Christians got rid of that because we want to help people to be virtuous and not entice them to the opposite. But yeah, it does show you. So yes, that Dionysus is the same as Hades is a very profound statement about really human psychology, right? Like the whole psychology of addiction. You could apply it to that. That's what he's seeing. That maybe the person who's partying the most, I mean, I hate to say it, sometimes with suicide, right? The person who parties the most cheerful, and then, like, wait a minute, he was the party animal, but inside he was actually, let's say someone's dying inside, right? Because it's not actually making him happy. Because what makes us happy is meaningful relationships, right? This is Aristotle's idea of perfect friendship, that not a friendship just based on having fun, but an actual meaningful bond. And so, like, for example, marriage, right? For most people, not for, right? If you're called to celibacy, that's a higher vocation. But, right, meaningful relationships. And so, fornicating and sleeping with a different woman every Friday at the temple, like, it's not going to give you happiness and fulfillment. So, see what I mean? Yeah.
I don't know if we're getting to this fragment, but I did kind of want to ask about Heraclitus' the fragment 81. Because I'm kind of wondering, he uses a term like divine law. So, like, men should speak with rational awareness and thereby hold on strongly to that which is shared in common, as a city holds on to its law, and even more strongly. For all human laws are nourished by the one divine law, which prevails as far as it wishes, suffices for all things, and yet is something more than they. And I'm kind of wondering, if
Right.
he's a materialist, is it probable that he's using divine law analogously?
Right. So, by the way, when years ago, I just figured, well, he must think there's a God because he talks about the divine law. He's just rejecting, like number 78 is a great example. Number 79, 78 makes it clear, right? They're acting like they're crazy. And then because he mentioned divine law, I was like, well, maybe he thinks there's a God, right? And there are even ancient commentators who will say that. Will say, like Saint Clement will say, well, he thinks there's a God because he'll quote that kind of thing. But I think there's a key texture that, like, where he actually says what he thinks that God is. And so, see what I mean? Where he actually tells you what God is, that's going to be what's more, like, let's look at 119. Who's next? On page 79, 119.
Wisdom is one and unique. It is unwilling, and yet willing to be called by the name of Zeus.
Okay, so that's somewhat ambiguous. I think, now actually the word wisdom here is the word logos, right? Which basically means reason. Remember, mythos versus logos. So logos is unwilling and yet willing to be called by the name of Zeus. Okay, next.
Wisdom is one, to know the intelligence by which all things are steered through all things.
And he actually says logos once again. So the thing is this a higher intelligence like in Xenophanes, or is this just the order of nature? And then Robert, number 121 is the one where he's telling us what he thinks that God is.
God is day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, satiety and want.
Does that sound like a personal God to you? Or does that sound like just the order of the universe, the order of things, the order of life? Like kind of like Dionysus and Hades are actually the same. Like if you live like that, you're on a path to destruction. And it's not because he thinks there's an afterlife. He just has observed that it doesn't make people happy. Keep going.
but he undergoes transformations just as.
Now remember, there's footnotes in the back. The notes in the back say a neutral base. So if you're making a perfume, I guess first you got like a neutral base, like the liquid that you add things with, like add this and that. So that's the comparison he's making here. He says that in the footnotes in the back. Even though the text is missing, you can tell from the context. Okay.
When
Just,
mixed,
yeah. Sorry.
when mixed with a fragrance is named according to the particular aroma which it gives off.
So he's saying, right, God, quote unquote God, should he get a capital G here? Question? Is like a neutral base that I make perfumes with. Like if I put rose petals in it, now it's rose perfume. If I put tulips in it, I don't know, it's tulip perfume. Or, I don't, what it's, any other example you want to give something that itself is just neutral, but that you can change into different things? Like what are day and night? Were we talking about logic class? Right, opposites in a sense, right? So this is opposites too. Winter and summer, war and peace, fullness and want. Is this a personal God?
Since Heraclitus is sort of the first like process philosopher, he could be saying that since it's the process of these contradictions that brings about change, and
right.
This is what God is.
Yes, and even he undergoes transformations. I mean, he, quote unquote, he. I mean, so really God here, it seems like God is nature. Nature is what's divine. But then you think about the Milesians, right? He comes after the Milesians. Thales, well, there's water and everything is full of gods. Everything has water. Everything has some hidden force in it, making it do things. Right? Anaximander, well, there's something boundless. Anaximenes, well, there's this, this air, and it's divine because it's eternal. You see. Think about, how you can make this when people say, the universe. Like the universe sent me something. That's kind of the similar idea. Now, they don't want to say God sent me something. God helped me. The universe is guiding me. Like, is it personal? I don't know. It's just the universe. Is it something? Is it a being or is it just the order of things? I don't know. Probably it's just the order of things. It's the nature of things. So I think this is very similar to nowadays when people say the universe, and they'll give it a capital U, but that's not God, right? The universe. Nature is day and night, winter and summer. Nature undergoes transformations. A good one about Hesiod. That's another really good. Remember, Hesiod works in days, right? You work unless there's a festival because there's no Sunday, right? That's a Jewish thing that we then took up. Number 94. Who's next? Have you read, Ricky?
Hesiod distinguishes good days and evil days, not knowing that every day is like every other.
So should we have the Saturnalia and have a big festival and give gifts? Like, this is the precursor to Christmas, right? That we transformed.
So
what's the point? Like every day is the same. There's no birthday of the gods. Or, yeah, go ahead.
Is he just saying that anything they make up is just a construct?
Right. He's not aware that every day is the same as every other. Number 93, Matthew.
Homer deserves to be thrown out of the contests and flogged, and Archilochus too.
Right. So. Right. So.
All right. I mean, 95 is not much better.
Right. So see, how is number 92, Zeke?
Men are deceived in their knowledge of things that are manifest, even as Homer was, who was the wisest of all the Greeks. For he was even deceived by boys killing lice, and they said to him, what we have seen and grasped, these we leave behind, whereas what we have not seen and grasped, these we carry away.
So why is he comparing him to what that's saying? He's basically saying that Homer is similar to do. That's what. How is Homer doing that? Right. So if you have lice.
Because if you don't kill them all, they bring them with you.
Okay. And what do they symbolize here?
The myths.
Right. Exactly. That he hasn't understood. He's not sharing knowledge, but he's just sharing things that aren't true. Okay, so in that light, number 86, Christian.
86. Gods and men honor those slain in battle.
So the gods here, is he? How do we reconcile that with what he says about Homer? Is he talking about Zeus is honoring Achilles because, he's honoring the Greeks who died, Zeus and Ares, and what do you think? What do we do with the word gods?
No, he doesn't believe in the gods.
Right. So what is? Yeah,
It's like history.
some kind of
Yeah.
symbolic meaning. Gods, right. So it shows you can't take it literally. You have to look at all the fragments. Gods are just he's just meaning like I once made a joke. I wanted to sit at a table and I said, "Oh, the table gods have not smiled on me today." I was making a joke because I wanted to get a seat at the refectory and there wasn't a seat. I said the table gods have not favored me today. Does that mean that I'm a polytheist? No, I'm just a figure of speech, right? The gods are frowning on our efforts to have our logic review because it keeps not happening. They keep being obstacles. Doesn't mean I'm a polytheist. I'm just way of speaking, huh?
So could the gods in that sense also be, like, to talk about what you were talking about earlier, could they be like how we immortalize figures like Alexander the Great or Napoleon?
Right. How about 85? What do you mean 85? Or Timothy?
85. The best of men choose one thing in preference to all else, immortal glory in preference to more good, whereas the masses simply glut themselves like cattle.
Exactly. Look at Napoleon, right? I mean, even Hitler. He's gone down in history. You can't deny it, right?
Well, some people
I mean,
try.
Right. Alexander the Great. All these great leaders. I don't know, Lee and what's his name? The other guy. Grant and Lee. Like everyone knows what those names are, right? They changed history, that kind of thing. Huh?
But this is Achilles' argument in the Iliad when he's fighting Troy. Is like he wants a name that he has. He wants the honor and the recognition, and it seems as though Heraclitus, because he will be remembered, but it seems like Heraclitus is saying that that's a good thing and that's true, that there's nothing else after that.
Yeah, exactly. So in that sense, he is agreeing with the kind of certain values of the Iliad, but just not the anthropomorphic polytheism. And that's kind of the honor shame ethic, that I want to be honored, and the more honor I can have, eventually I can have glory and a name that will live on. And so he is kind of beholden to that, and even really a kind of elitism here, right? Number 84.
To me, one man is worth 10,000 if he is first rate.
Right. So certainly a certain elitism here, right? There are certain people who are more gifted and successful and ambitious, and they're the ones who are going to, move history forward. And so this is going to be influential thousands of years later with Hegel, right? So really in the modern period, he won't really come into his own Heraclitus until the modern period with someone like Hegel, who teaches that there's a dialectic, and that the history is dialectical. The way for history to move forward is by conflict and by great men rising up. So Hegel was a huge fan of Napoleon. Napoleon was going to unite all of Europe by conquering it under this one big secularist government. Even Russia, he was going to defeat everyone. And Hegel thought this is history moving forward, right? And then of course that's not how it worked out. But right, that's influences Hegel. And then after that, the other person that maybe the most influences is Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. He talks about the will to power, that it's basically good to pursue power, and that some of these things, like he explicitly says that he appreciates, Nietzsche explicitly says that he appreciates Heraclitus. And then Nietzsche in turn is quite influential for the postmoderns, for basically the 20th century philosophers, continental philosophers like Michel Foucault, who do use the Nietzschean idea of a will to power, that they apply it to the individual. So I have the will to define myself however I want. There's nothing outside of me that can tell me how I should define myself. That's how, like Sartre will say that. Uh-huh.
But in 88, he's talking about hubris, right? To extinguish hubris is more needful than to extinguish fire. But it sounds like he's expressing hubris with like the great men theory.
Yeah, he is, right. So that would be a problem, with his that's a good criticism to make of him. You could say, well, Heraclitus, if you really think we shouldn't have hubris, then how are you saying that, right, the great man is the one who is the best? Okay, let's see, is there anything? Yeah. But I think number 121 about God being, so-called God being day and night, the opposites, the coincidence of opposites, is really showing that this is not a personal God, even though Clement of Alexandria thought that. Perhaps Clement of Alexandria did not have access to that fragment. So let's look at the definition sheet. Gerald, do you want to go to page 6? We have a couple of definitions here for Heraclitus, and then we can go on to Parmenides.
So start with Heraclitus?
Yes.
Heraclitus, first process philosopher, change is the ultimate explanatory principle of everything. All things flow. Fire is the first material principle.
Okay, good. Derek?
Logos, unobservable law of force that both underlies and governs all things. Heraclitus, confer laws of nature.
So it's similar to Logos versus Mythos, obviously, generally speaking, but more specifically for Heraclitus, right? I think that was pretty clear. Brian? And yeah, feel free to be loud, because
Okay, so we're gonna, dialectic?
Yep.
Dialectic. Opposition and conflict are the only means for progress. War is father of all and king of all.
So the Greek is polemos, pater, panton. Notice the word pater is identical to Latin, because Latin and Greek are sister languages. So it's if you ever want to do any Greek, it's very beneficial to already know Latin. Okay, so that's dialectic, and that's what's going to later influence both Hegel and Nietzsche. All right, so let's go on to the next chapter, which is the Eleatic school, because Parmenides was from Elea, so they call it Eleatic. And page 90, let's read a bit of the. So Parmenides is very paradoxical as well in his own way. So it's like the opposite of Heraclitus. It's still paradoxical. Michael?
The school of Elea is of unique historical importance. It represents the first all-out attempt in the Western world to establish pure reason, with its demands of logical consistency and relatedness as the sole criterion of truth.
Now, when he says pure reason there, anyone know what that would be reference to? So Kant, who's like the major modern, the most influential modern, like Descartes is an early modern, but Kant is like if you're a modern, Kant is a high point. And because Hegel is starting to be transitional into the postmodern period. And Kant's magnum opus is called The Critique of Pure Reason. Okay?
The main Eleatic position established by Parmenides, reaffirmed and developed with individual approaches and twists by Zeno and Melissus, can be summarized into two propositions. 1, being is one, and 2, being is unchanging.
So see, he's the exact opposite of Heraclitus. Heraclitus is saying everything is changed. He's saying there is no such thing as change. And for Heraclitus, everything's material. Well, here being is one, and being is described in spiritual terms, because he's going to say that language, thought, and being are the same. Well, if thought and being are the same, that makes it spiritual and material. Okay?
These are formidably abstract avowals, and they bring us to the very limits of what can be said and asked. Some would complain indeed that they take us quite beyond those limits. At any rate, the challenge which the two Eleatic propositions have presented to subsequent philosophers, notably to the critical pluralists, who are the subject of the next two chapters, and to Plato, was both forceful and pervasive, and a student of Greek philosophy cannot avoid coming to terms with them. Granted, the dubious nature of the questions or purported questions, is ultimate reality one or many, and does ultimate reality change or remain always the same? Questions which, more than any others, have brought metaphysics into disrepute in certain quarters.
Right, so Kant is basically going to reject metaphysics and say that's not even a real question. So that's why he says purported question there. And so the moderns will say, well, after Kant, there's no more metaphysics, and that's kind of the postmoderns don't talk about metaphysics anymore. So, okay.
We should nevertheless agree that a school of powerful and serious thinkers, such as the surviving arguments of the Eleatics, show them unmistakably to be, is not likely to dedicate its mental energies for 2 or more generations to questions that mean nothing at all.
Now, here, I've had the time, right? This is the good thing about it, having time, is to read some of how Wheelwright's other stuff, some of his other works. And now I basically, what he basically, I think, is some kind of Buddhist or some kind of, he thinks along more Buddhist or Hindu lines, like some kind of monism, maybe. It's actually called neutral monism. Hinduism is neutral monism. Neutral monism, it's not on your definition sheet. So remember, there's materialist monism and spiritualist monism, correct?
Yeah.
Neutral monism means what is most fundamental, which they call Brahman, is prior to matter and spirit. So it's interesting because just learning these basic philosophical categories can then actually help you understand even other systems of thought that are, from a completely different perspective. But it's neutral monism. So Brahman can become Atman, which is spirit or soul, and then also becomes the material world. You see. So, and Wheelwright himself, I don't know how he seems more like along those lines, but he's not a strict materialist. So in that sense, because he's not a strict materialist, if you're thinking along those in that kind of quote unquote mystical way, then there's going to be some appeal to Parmenides, right? So you could even kind of compare Parmenides to maybe that Hindu, some Eastern religion or philosophy, right? Like that Hinduism or Brahmanism. The comparison, I'm not saying they're the same, I'm just saying that there are interesting comparisons to be made there about this way of talking about things, that everything is one. So it's not pantheism per se, but there's more than one way to say that everything is one. You could be a pantheist, you could be a materialist and say everything is just energy, right? There's all these different ways you could say that. And when we're making those kind of statements, we're talking about philosophy, right? Because we're talking about just the big picture, everything, not just one particular topic. Okay?
The meanings may be partisan and one-sided, sometimes quaintly so, and perhaps no one would care to uphold them today as an offering a suitable procedure for philosophical inquiry. Nevertheless, the very limitations of Eleatism serve to delineate its monistic perspective the more clearly.
Right. So, see, it's definitely monism, that's for sure. And I called it metaphysical monism because it's saying everything is being. Because it's true. It's right. The ambient philosophy in America is pragmatism, and so for a pragmatist, this is just a complete waste of time. Right? Everything is being is one. There's like nonsense. Does it have cash value? No. Forget about it. Moving on. Right? Let's go do science and do something productive. That's kind of their attitude. Of course, we're not actually answering questions about why we're here, does God exist, or we're saying that we're atheists, right? That God doesn't exist. So it's true that the reaction to Parmenides could be, oh, this is just doesn't make any sense. So he's trying to kind of preclude that reaction and say, well, let's at least try to wrap our minds around it a little bit. Okay.
And monism has long been, whatever its guises and combinations, one of the dominant ideas, even to its opponents, in the range of human thought.
Yeah, and I think he, on some level, agrees with it. Wheelwright does. Not in a really theistic way, but in that it reminds me most of like it's some kind of Hindu approach, not the Hindu religion per se, but just the neutral monism approach. Okay.
Parmenides. The founder of the philosophy in question was Parmenides of Elea, by the name of which city the philosophy came into to be designated. Even if, as an ancient tradition asserts, Parmenides may have studied in his younger days under Xenophanes, the temperaments of the two men are vastly different, as will be evident to anyone who compares their respective groups of utterances, and the alleged connection between the lively religious monotheism of the one and the abstract metaphysical monism. The alleged connection between the lively religious monotheism of the one and the abstract metaphysical monism of the other is too tenuous to be of any service in suggesting a view as to their relations.
Right. I mean, remember, for Xenophanes, there's God. He knows everything. He's moving everything. All we have are these tiny fragments, so I just have to go back to the same fragments, right? God hadn't made honey, figs would be sweeter, so God is looking out for us. That's why it's going to lively monotheism. And then this abstract metaphysical monism, just everything is being. And there's no talk of God with a capital G. So God disappears. So if it may be that Xenophanes taught Parmenides, and if that's true, I'm kind of giving you the answer here so we can go a bit quicker to how to make sense of Parmenides. If it's true that Xenophanes taught Parmenides, I don't think that's unlikely, then he had a different take. Instead of there being a God who's everything is just being that never changes. Okay, so this is all, it's a good introduction, but why don't we dive into the text? So, page 95, who's next?
Jeremy. The steeds that draw my chariot for conducting me to the furthermost reach of my desire, bringing me at once onto the resounding road of the goddess, along which he who knows is born through all cities.
So it's kind of striking because he's going to be teaching this metaphysical monism, and yet it's a poem, right? So this is why the pre-Socratics are very engaging, because he's eventually going to get to the monism about being, but he just starts off with this, it seems like a kind of inner journey that he's talking about, of obviously, right, his soul taking him away from the material world. And then he's being taken by these, heavenly beings up to the gates of justice. Kind of think of, like, in our view, like St. Peter, right, at the gates of heaven, and with that. And then the goddess Justice, who's obviously, right, symbolic, is going to teach him about being. Okay?
Along this road I was carried. Yes, the wise horses drew me in my chariot, while maidens led the way. The axle, urged round and round by the whirling wheels on either side, glowed in the sockets and gave forth a singing hum. The handmaidens of the sun, who had left the realms of night, and had thrown back their veils from their faces, were driving the chariot speedily toward the light.
So what purpose does this serve, right? What kind of contrast is there here? Because, I mean, obviously, he's not just a poet. He's not just writing about, right? Yeah.
I mean, you really only see this, I mean, in regards to poetry, referring to like war, so like chariots going into battle. But this is more so within the context of like going upwards to reason, to like to I guess intellectual.
Well, as far as like parallels, Helios, the god of the sun, had a chariot, sort of the chariot. So it seems like that imagery, right? The handmaidens of the sun, like he's being taken up into the heavens. But so, because he would carry the sun in his chariot. There's Apollo is the god of the sun, but there's also Helios. They have a lot of kind of reduplication in the midst. But the contrast between like light and darkness, or day and night, and then that's going to play out, because what he's going to say is that it's going to play out in his metaphysics, where being is the realm of light and the physical world is the realm of darkness. So that's why he's introducing these contrasts. Next. Are you done? Mario?
We came to the gates of day and night, which are fit between a lintel above and a stone threshold below. Although the gates are ethereal substance, they have the strength of mighty doors when closed. And retributive justice secures them with bolts that both punish and reward.
Okay, so I mean, does there seem to be some kind of afterlife here for Parmenides? Yeah. Matthew? Yes. Right? I mean, yeah, both to punish and reward, you can either be let in and rewarded, or you can be cast out and punished. So it seems that way, right? The gates of day and night, right? He's going to leave behind the realm of night, which is the material world, and enter into the realm of day. Right? And then justice secures them. And so the goddess Justice is now who's going to speak to him. Right? Do you want to read the bottom sentence?
The goddess greeted me kindly and taking my hand in hers, she spoke this word.
By the way, I don't think you should capitalize goddess. It's just have lowercase personally. If I translated it, it doesn't have a capital in it. Okay, read. So let me just see. Yeah, I guess you can keep reading.
Welcome, my son, you who came to our
Abode.
with immortal charioteers at their reins. It is no evil fate that has sent you on this road, but right and justice have brought you here. For away from the beaten path of man, it is needful that you learn of all matters, both the unshaken heart of well-rounded, true, and the opinions of mortals which lack true belief. For it is needful that by passing everything under review, you should learn this also, how to judge a mere seeming.
Okay, so this is going to be the dichotomy he sets up. The material world is mere seeming, it's mere appearance, it's not actually real. What's real is being, and being is unshaken, the unshaken heart of well-rounded truth, right? That's being. And then the opinions of mortals that lack true belief are just believing that the external world exists. So this is going to be very influential then for Plato, because Plato, we'll see, has this thing about the allegory of the cave, where we think the physical world is real, but it's actually not, and we have to get out of the cave, which is the physical world, and think about the spiritual world. So you can see how Plato is very influenced by this. Right and justice far away from the beaten paths of men. So the beaten paths of men are this realm of night, concerned about the material world, which isn't actually real. Let's see. Who's next? James, number 2.
The way of truth. The goddess speaks further. Never shall it be proven that not being is. From that path of inquiry, restrain your mind.
So if you remember Father Anatolios in his talk, he mentioned Parmenides, and he was saying you really can't think of non-being. Well, that's what he's talking about. See, so the first thing she's going to say here is, in terms of the way of truth, right? You can't think about non-being, and later she's going to say non-being cannot be thought or spoken of. Now remember, non-being, what kind of term is that? Anybody?
It's a contradictory.
Contradictory. So if a non-boomerang means
everything that
it's
a
not
boomerang is,
then what is a non-being? Well, everything is not being, but what is not being? Basically nothing, right? Non-being is nothing. So can you think about nothing? Not really, because, I mean, if I think about it, if I think about a black, empty void, like, I'm still thinking about something that's black, but it's not black because it's nothing. And if I think about void, I'm thinking about empty space, but it's not empty space either, right? So you're not going to get very far thinking about nothingness, because it's nothing, right? Okay?
Do not let custom, born of everyday experience, tempt your eyes to be aimless, your ear and tongue to be echoes.
Right. What did Heraclitus say we should trust?
Senses.
Our senses. So we should trust our everyday experience, right? Should we believe the myths? No. What is she saying about everyday experience?
Do not.
Don't trust it. It deceives you. And it's not because she wants you to go back to the myths, it's because she wants you to realize, she wants to say that there's just being. Okay?
Let reason be your judge when you consider this much disputed question. The heart, when left to itself, misses the road.
Right, so we just have to follow reason, and reason is going to lead us to say that change is impossible, that Heraclitus is actually the opposite of what's true. And some of these, I think some of what she says, you can kind of tell she's specifically referring to Heraclitus. Okay, I say she, I mean he, right, Parmenides. All right, so let's, we'll next time we'll do Parmenides and Zeno.